Welcome back to Hardball. After Rick Santorum's strong showing in Iowa Tuesday, people are asking whether he is the anti-Romney alternative. Many conservatives have been hoping to find, or whether he's just the latest candidate to peak and then collapse. Can Santorum stand up to the national scrutiny that's coming his way? He has yet to be truly vetted. Let's look at his record. Robert Trainum is the Comcast Washington bureau chief. He served as an aide to Santorum for 10 years. And Dana Milbeck is, of course, the swashbuckling columnist for the Washington Post. Robert, thank you for joining us. And you really know him. I want to talk about some issues that show how conservative I believe Rick Santorum is on sexual or cultural issues. In October of this year, Rick Santorum raised eyebrows with comments about birth control. Birth control, not abortion. He told a blogger, quote, "One of the things I will talk about that no president has talked about before is, I think, the dangers of contraception in this country. It's not okay. It's a license to do things in a sexual realm that is counter to how things are supposed to be." Well, last night, Bill O'Reilly asked him about his views on contraception. Let's listen.
You say that the states should have the right to ban some contraception. That's right off the bat going to be a big one.
Well, the states have a right to do a lot of things. That doesn't mean they should do it. Someone asked me if the states have the right to do it. Yes, they have the right to do it. They shouldn't do it. I wouldn't vote for it if they did. But that doesn't mean they don't have the right to do it. As you know, Bill, as you're a Catholic Church teaches that contraception is something you shouldn't do. And so when I was asked the question on contraception, I said I didn't support it.
Well, actually, I think Bill O'Reilly's right about the views of the average churchman in the Catholic Church, but the laity doesn't make the rules in the Catholic Church, as we all know. Or maybe it shouldn't, to keep everything cool here. But here's the question, Dana. Here's a guy who believes that the Supreme Court decision, the Griswold decision, the famous one that basically opened the door to Roe v. Wade, basically said that states can outlaw birth control. You can't say no condoms can be sold in drugstores. You can't do that under the Constitution. It's an individual privacy right. Now, here's a guy saying it's not a privacy right. I mean, this guy goes past Robert Bork here.
Oh, sure, right. I mean, we've gone beyond abortion to an entirely different realm where
IUDs, everything.
Where there's widespread support in this country and a moral support for it as well. I think what's happened here is nobody had any idea really what Rick Santorum was because we were focused on all the other people. I've been following him on and off for 2 decades now, so I have a pretty good sense of why this kind of conservatism doesn't really hold up here. I mean, to speak about birth control that way, to use the phrase man on dog in a discussion about gay people in America, these things are just so far outside the realm of the ordinary conversation, Republicans and Democrats alike.
You know, Robert, I thought it was, I do think it's off base for him to go to Bill O'Reilly and say, you're a fellow Catholic, you should have my views on this, when in fact we're talking about constitutional decisions, not about theological or moral decisions. He takes the moral and the theological and puts it right there and confronting the constitutional question whether a woman or a male has a right to buy birth control devices. Explain that based on your history, why he would think like that, or how does he think like that?
Well, two things. First and foremost, obviously, I'm not a spokesperson, so I don't want to get too much inside of his head. But knowing Rick the way I know him, I think what he said there with Bill O'Reilly is like, look, I am for banning partial birth abortion. I am adamantly pro-life, and that obviously goes towards the whole entire birth control.
That's not what they're talking about. Robert, you're wrong. They weren't talking about that. They weren't talking about abortion at all. They were talking about contraception. So stick to the subject. Where does he stand? Does he think you can outlaw contraception under the Constitution? Does he believe that?
Well, Chris, that was my next point, if I could finish, which was transitioning to...
No, begin. Don't finish. Begin.
That was transitioning.
Is he against birth control legally? Is he talking about it's okay to illegalize it, to ban it? Does he believe that?
I don't know the answer to that question. What I do know is what he just said was that really is a states' rights issue, and if in fact I was voting on that, I would vote no. But he was also saying, to your original question, Chris, as a Catholic, my Catholic teaching has told me that the pill is a no-no, and thus in the process, I believe, meaning Rick Santorum is saying this, that should not be allowed in the public square. I think that's what he was trying to say.
No, he didn't. He didn't. I want to tell you what he said. He said my religion should dominate. It should trump issues of the Constitution. He was saying, Bill O'Reilly, you and I are the same religion. Therefore, we should deny a woman's constitutional right to buy birth control, or a male to buy birth control. Isn't that what he just said?
I don't think he said that.
He just did. Okay, he just did. And that's what scares me. He thinks we should have a theocracy. Let's take a look at this. Here's Rick Santorum opposing the Lawrence v. Texas decision that struck down anti-sodomy laws. Here he is early this year defending his initial opposition, which he was criticized heavily for. Let's watch.
I said, if the Supreme Court says that you have the right to consensual sexual activity, then you have the right to incest, you have the right to polygamy, you have the right to all of these other sexual variations. And so the gay community said, he's comparing gay sex to incest and polygamy. How dare he do this? And they have gone out on I would argue, the jihad against Rick Santorum since then.
Okay, I'll give you first shot at that, Robert. What do you think he's saying there?
I think what he's saying is that there's not a right to privacy under the Constitution, and thus in the process, if you don't have the right to do certain things in your home, from a legal standpoint, he's kind of right. I mean, the word privacy is nowhere in the Constitution. However, and let me be very clear about this, Chris, I am a gay person. I am openly gay and I am out. I believe I have the right under the Constitution, this is me speaking here, to obviously to fall in love and to be with whomever I choose to. So that's where I just
Where's he on that? Where's he on what you just said? Where's Santorum on that?
I'm sorry?
Where's Santorum on what you just said? Did he agree with your right to do what you just said, to have your own orientation and to act on it?
I believe Senator Santorum believes in that. Where we disagree with is he believes that obviously I should not have the right to marry, and I fundamentally disagree with him on that.
No, doesn't he go further and say that you should not be allowed to be gay in any actual way?
Oh, absolutely not.
Doesn't he say that pretty much?
No, absolutely not.
I understand.
Absolutely not.
He said he has your right to your identity, but not to your behavior.
Well, look, you need to ask Rick Santorum about that, but I've worked for him for 10 years. I was openly out to him. I never, ever heard him say anything remotely like that at all.
Okay, so he's never come out against gay basic sexual behavior. He's never had a problem with that.
Again, you have to ask him specifically, but I've never, ever heard him say anything like that. And let me just be very clear about this, because this is something that's very personal to me. If, in fact, I ever heard him say anything like that, if, in fact, I ever thought he thought that, I would never work for him. I mean, this is ridiculous. I mean, this is absolutely ridiculous.
You're in a good position, Robert, to explicate him here on television. I'm glad you're a guest. You seem to agree that he has constitutional differences with liberals, obviously on the right to privacy. He's more with Judge Bork on that. You argue that he's not anti-gay in terms of identity. Well, where is his disagreement with the gay community? Why do they really go after him all the time? What's the issue there?
Because he speaks very passionately. Because he speaks very passionately about the fact that he believes that gays and lesbians should not marry. He believes in the sanctity of marriage. He believes that marriage should be defined by one man and one woman, and that's obviously something that runs counter to folks that are like me that happen to fall in love with someone of the same sex. That is a major, major disagreement that a lot of gays and lesbians feel towards Senator Santorum. I can understand.
Does he believe that people like you have a right to serve the country with open orientation?
When you say serve the country, you mean in the military?
Yes. Don't ask, don't tell. Where's he on that?
I don't know the answer to that. I don't know the answer to that.
You don't know? I thought you might. Let me go back to, let's take another issue, the hawkish position. Let's take a look at some. We don't have time. What do you make of all this? Is this going to become an issue with him and the other conservatives?
Of course it is, Chris. And Robert is saying that his boss was a decent man who didn't discriminate against him. And that's well and good. But what we're talking about as a country right now is what Santorum believes in terms of public policy. And he's always been out there on these issues. It's sort of a big government conservatism, saying government can constrain and direct the morals of the people, whether that was the faith-based initiative he did, whether it was welfare reform, whether it was Terry Schiavo and gay rights. There's a whole long list of this where he says government should be able to tell people what sort of moral behavior is acceptable and is not. That's really not something that's in the mainstream of our debate right now.
Well, can I respond to that? Hold on. I need to respond to that. Because Senator Santorum, when I worked for him, he would use your argument, Mark, and say, well, wait a minute, the government does have a responsibility from a moral standpoint to sometimes tell us when we're wrong. He said he makes that example when it comes to slavery. He makes that example when it comes to the persecution of African Americans during the civil rights movement. So there's been many a times when, and again, this is what the senator would say, many a times when the government had the right and should have the right to intervene and telling us that we were wrong in terms of how we were living our lives from a society standpoint.
Let me point out what I think, Robert. You have your personal relationship with him, which I value. I think personal terms with a person tell you things you don't ever get from public statements. But the public statements of Senator Santorum are clear. He just said to Bill O'Reilly he thinks it's all right for the state to outlaw the purchase of birth control devices. That's an invasive national policy. To me, that's the government going into people's private lives in a way it shouldn't. And I think it's a real challenge to anybody who cares about individual liberties. He also is very clear on the fact he thinks it's okay to outlaw what he calls sodomy. Fine. But that's a very invasive federal policy or state policy. Allow the government to come in and say you can't have sexual acts between people of the same sex. That is a very invasive public policy. And we ought to know this about the guy. These are serious issues, and they really do offend a lot of Americans. Anyway, thank you, Dana, and thank you, Robert. We'll have these arguments.